going to start with 3 poems that were written, all 3 of them above 8,000 feet in elevation above sea level in the High Sierra. And they come out of that environment. The first is called Siegfried's Destiny. When Siegfried killed the dragon guarding the chamber of his destiny, the mazy cave of legendary echoes, tasting its blood, he understood the parlance of the birds and unperfidious language of wildflowers, and recognized his teacher's wheedling purposed to wield him to alien ends, an unknowing tool. Self-deluded in disillusionment, estranged from his own purposes, astray, he circled, bewildered, harrowed by furies that drove him to distrust even the overdose of dragon's blood that unstopped his ears to the earth's voices and purged his wits with nice lies, delivering him at last to the high, rock-bound, narrow, windy pass where the world falls away on both sides, there to constellate his fated stars. This is called Sierra Gentians. Sierra gentians. Most summers, Sierra gentians bloom unnoticed, hidden in meadow grass on their short stems. A lowly flower, the yellowish white of old bone. Its chalices are more conspicuous, their throats exposed in the sparse grass of a dry year. Stoop closer, and the purple streaks appear that mark the inner faces of the petals. Kneel in the morning dew and see how they descend inside the bell and disappear, swallowed in shadow among a fading speckle of green flecks. Pale trumpets trailing in the sandy soil at lakeside, tiny bone-white cups for Persephone, gathering dawnlight, humbled in the dirt, where we will all lie down in the one bed together, and each lie down in the one bed apart. This next poem is called Ode on Water, and it's a poem that Bob was referring to in his introduction. It starts with an epigraph from the ancient Greek poet Pindar that is translated in the first verse, and 3 little bits of foreign language show up a little bit later. Jupiter tonans in excelsis, which is a variation on a phrase out of Horace. It means Jupiter thundering in the high places or something like that. Hoopsi bremetes Zeus, which means high thundering Zeus, and Donner der Herr, which is Hoopsi bremetes Zeus is Homer, and the phrase gets echoed down in later ancient Greek poetry. Donner der Herr is out of Wagner, it means Lord Thunder. Ode on Water. Ariston men Hudor, Pindar. Yes, water is best, alive and icy from a free high country creek, or warm from a canteen, overflowing nostrils stinging with sweat. It replenishes the substance flesh is mostly made of, the savor of origin surpassing other tastes. It cleanses and clarifies the palate and the eyes, renews spirits flagging when the grade steepens. It revives desire. The artificial thunder of military aircraft penetrates the remotest recesses and defiles of the High Sierra, banging on the polished walls of pathless granite canyons that remain unshaken, although the calm is broken briefly. But when the gods of weather by whatever name you please, Jupiter tonans in excelsis, hupsi primites Zeus, or Donner der Herr, when the lords of thunder mean to carve out mile-wide gorges, wearing mountains to sand for Pacific beaches, water is the tool they choose. Water that always seeks the depths, following where it's led till its own course becomes its impetus, rocketing off boulders into a pool of candid stillness where trout bask in shaded pockets. It wells across the basin's lip to gurgle over cobbles or cuts lazy oxbows through a meadow, barely whispering among aspen. Always in free running streams there are voices, a distant conversation, nearly audible if you listen closely, its manifold inflections braiding in a slippery, fluent interplay, elusive as mercury. These are the voices that consoled Bellerophon, answering his candor when he wandered in the wilderness alone, eating his heart out, hated by all the gods. At evening, he lay down at the water's edge to rest under the sycamores and maples near the meeting of two streams. And as he drifted off to sleep, among the babbling throng, trying to distinguish the multitude of sounds entwined in the passing current, and tell each strand by name and character, he heard them calling amid the clamor, their polyphony not to be drowned out by thunder, and they restored him, a silken curtain sluicing its mossy slab, the recurrent gulp of an eddy, a thin drip resonant in a rock hollow. So, in early summer, when the snowpack melts in the high country, corn lilies thrust the spear tips of their tight coiled leaves up through a snowdrift's thinning margin, new growth seeking sunlight to remake the meadow. Every gully swells with runoff. The least depression becomes a watercourse as snowmelt finds its way downhill, and where it meets a trail cut, it fills the trench hikers and horse packers have worn into the soil and carries off the dirt and leaves the stones. And the steeper the path, the rockier the water leaves it. I'm going to come down into the city now, down around sea level, and read a couple poems that come out of that world. This is called Pyramid Scheme, and it's a shaped poem. You can see that it is it's got 6 little pyramids in it. Pyramid Scheme. Crone, old meat. Once this town was your home. Now you're living on the street. The bottom line has put you there to rot. You can't pay the rent. Every 7 years it doubles. Now shelter is too dear for you, since who you are is what you've got. It takes 6 weeks to build a cabin, 6 months to make a house, but 30 years won't pay for either, the banker and the landlord say. So nightly, in TV dreams, the pyramid of paper mounts in piles. It gets a purchase on your back and towers and sprawls and sags till what you got is what you are. Your family's gone, the neighbors all rank strangers, a shopping cart of newspapers and rags. Crone, caryatid broken under your stone. The full weight of the pyramid crushes down on your shoulders, anonymous as brick. doxology. Praise monsters if you mean to rise. Praise them that fatten on their neighbor's hunger, dividing each from each and all from all to make weak prey. They are above the law because they own the law. Praise monsters. Praise clear-cutters and strip miners. Praise marketeers of poison and delusion, manufacturers of scarcity and profiteers of famine. The earth is their inheritance to desecrate. Praise monsters. Praise the single eye that blazes atop the pyramid where we keep our places by keeping down those underneath and rise by the betrayal of those who stand beside us. Praise servitude. Praise fear. Praise monsters. Last, praise the dust thrown in your eyes. Throw another fistful for yourself. Can't you see a brighter future glinting in the grime? Praise your gag and praise your blinders. Praise monsters. Sovereignty. The child riding his father's shoulders above the crowd looks down into the whirl of faces swimming at his knees, king of the world in his own mind. At each turn, alternate destinies invite his liking. He gapes, meanwhile, and holds tight, safe on the charmed brink of childhood, a bubble clinging at the fall's lip, delighting to be thus elevated. Later, learning to carry his own weight on solid ground, he will denounce the idols riding his father's back, curse naked king and paper crown to make his way, still not noticing how his choices begin to overtake him, the water rising at his heels. And what if, his father's age, hearing his own son on his shoulders laughing in his blind spot, he starts to glimpse amid the hazard of stray blows like a face returning in a dream the emerging features of the fate that took him captive, sovereign, indelible. Suppose he finds the means to climb from the staining flood of self, to see the circle whole and know he is what he's become as the weight bears him down. Now will he learn mercy? I write poetry. I also translate poetry very haphazardly when poems come along and tug at my sleeve, poems in other languages that I sometimes read. And I try and wait until one tug, because I found that when I tried to do things as a project, the results are uneven. This is a translation of a poem by Théophile Gautier, who was the French poet from the middle of the 19th century to whom Baudelaire dedicated Les Fleurs du Mal. Unless you know it, you may have heard of it because it gets referenced by scholars of T.S. Eliot as a source for his line, Grishka is nice. It's called Carmen, and Carmen in Latin means song. But Carmen in French is a lady's name. Carmen is skinny. A stroke of bistre. I should tell you, bistre is an old-fashioned kind of makeup that's kind of, I think, kind of gray-green. And I think Carmen was probably, if Carmen was alive today, she'd be a goth. Carmen. Carmen is skinny. A stroke of bistre underlines her gypsy eye. Her hair is black and sinister. The devil tanned her hide. The women say that she is ugly, but all the men are mad for her. And the Archbishop of Toledo chants mass at her knees. For on her tawny amber nape, she knots her hair in a huge coil that, undone in the bedroom, robes her tiny body. And amid her pallid looks, her lips part with victorious laughter, pimento rouge, scarlet flower that takes its purple from heart's blood. Fashioned thus, our Moorist conquers the most exalted beauties, and with her eyes hot gleam sets fire to satisfaction. Her piquant ugliness contains this power, a grain of salt from that sea whence sprang, nude and provocative, the tart love goddess of the bitter gulf. I've been at work for several years now on a long poem that consists of individual poems. There are 25 of them now. It might be done, it might not. I haven't added anything since the middle of the summer, and I'm still sort of looking at it. It's called Substrate. The whole work has an epigraph, which is a fragment from the Alexandrian Greek poet Callimachus, Amarturon Uden Iedo. And partly because it is a fragment, there are a lot of ways you can translate that. One is, I'm interested in the poetry of fact. Another would be, I sing nothing unwitnessed. A third would be, don't blame me, it says right here. Chaucer sort of takes the idea in that direction when he says, as the book us tells. Pretty much nearly all of the poems in Substrate derive or speak from the vantage of an individual witness, and almost all of those witnesses have names, and I'll tell you about them as we get to them. I'm going to read the first poem and the last poem and 5 selected from in the middle of it. The first poem doesn't have a named witness. I guess the witness, you could say, is archaeology. It's called A Painted Hemisphere. The Mimbres ancients buried family skeletons prone underneath their Pueblo household floors, with broad ceramic bowls inverted over skulls interred, eye sockets upward, below their earthen domes. The inner face, a painted hemisphere of art for blind eternity. A hole punched through the center of the bowl chosen, fulfilling custom, letting the breath escape the broken clay, the image, the design. A lunar rabbit bends a quarter turn round this one's vacant middle. The winking crow perched halfway down his backbone beaks the nearest of 4 pair of ribs. Their cartoon crescents all the remains of the hare's hindquarters, his waning orb half eaten by the bird pecking clean the knuckles of his spine. This 5th moon rabbit, hare of the May, his good eye cocked off-center at the bottom of a punctured bowl, and grizzled whiskers quiz the solar scavenger fastened on his shoulder blade, talons in the quick. In his still gaze, outward serenity, a bemused whisper, sister quail, brother fish. In September of 1786, an expedition, a French scientific expedition in 3 sailing vessels visited Monterey, California, when Monterey was a Spanish town. This poem is through the eyes of Joseph Dagelet, who was the senior astronomer to the expedition. He was on the vessel called La Boussole, which means the compass. Esselin Bowman among savants. La Boussole, Monterey, September 21st, 1786. Though rightly our philosophers decry those circumnavigators who lay claim in their king's name to newfound lands without regard for the inhabitants because they come with bayonet and cannon, Monsieur Rollin, l'Abbé Monget, and I desired to be conveyed ashore this morning to take possession of this region in the name of Flora, our Lady Botany. Outside the royal hunting ground, no countryside in Europe so abounds in game. Pierre and Roux came for the sport, and La Manon pursuant to the study of savages whom his savants persuade him to call noble. We ranged the hillside southward in botanical researches and venery. I at once identified a new procumbent genus of Pentandria. Our ornithologist bagged numerous examples of the feathered tribe. We will sketch specimens, dissect, and stuff them after sailing. At noon, the gray-robed fathers received us with a sumptuous repast under an arbor in the mission garden. In the adjacent meadow, 4 deer browsed, edging closer by imperceptible increments through lunch, until we recognized natives disguised in hides, their bodies painted and stag heads fastened on their shoulders. They pantomimed the animal so neatly, its starts of watchfulness and pauses, feeding. Sighting them unforewarned 10 paces off, we would have fired. This is their stratagem for stalking deer. Often they drop several before the herd startles and flees. Through Padre Sitjar, we invited them to join us hunting back to the Presidio. Firearms no longer terrify them, and they are delighted by the effectiveness at distance of our fowling pieces upon a species of large quail prolific in coppices. The males with crests reverted, lead-colored, with ferruginous breast plumage and pinkish feet, more savory than those of France, and plumper. Esselin arrows seldom miss, and when our fire goes wide, exulting to display superior skill, while yet the birds flare from our shots, they bring them down. And 6 years later, another scientific expedition, this one under George Vancouver, for whom a couple cities and an island are named, also visited Spanish Monterey. The clerk on HMS Chatham, which was one of his 3 ships, was named Edward Bell. And his diary is now in a library in New Zealand. He uses a word for a dance, borrego, which I can't find any reference to that Spanish word meaning dance. It does mean a simpleton or a fool or a hoax. And I suspect that the Spanish ladies were hoaxing Edward Bell. This is called Fandango. HMS Chatham, December 3, 1792. At dusk, our cavalcade returned to Monterey. where Senior Quadra hosted a fiesta in honor of our visit. Society is small here, but it is made large by the addition of the wives and daughters of the officers, invited almost nightly to the governor's house. These ladies know our English minuets about as well as we know their borregos, and this increases the amusement. They wear their tresses loose at the neck or in long braids, and short-sleeved dresses, leaving the arm bare. Last night's party was to start at 8. At 10, the ladies made their entrance, scurrying by us like the local quail, and settling in a covey on cushions strewn on carpets over a curious dais facing the ballroom doors. Sundry dances ensued before the floor was cleared, and a guitar accompanied one couple in a fandango. Sometimes they come close, veer apart, and approach again, wheeling about and changing sides, smacking their fingers at every turn with wanton attitudes and leering looks, enough to discompose the gravity of a stoic. Captain Vancouver asked our Sandwich Island passengers to perform a dance and sing according to their customs. This failed to entertain one clutch of Spanish women who seemed to think it meant for ridicule and departed in a dudgeon. After the Commodore and our captain left, the dancing livened. Male voices joined the choruses, growing more boisterous and discordant as night advanced from the repeated application of aguardiente. Despite the pious fathers, native girls slip from their habitations, loitering about the woody recesses to catch our notice. Transparent beads allure and strike them with delight, and earrings gain the favor of the better part. Rowing back to the ship, we watched the stars begin to pale above the hills and listened to the guitars and voices carried across the water. They will keep it up past daylight from the noise. This is called After the Rodeo, and it has an epigraph from Homer's Iliad, Epia Terawenta, which is usually translated winged words, but it also might mean fleshed words, and that would then make the words arrows. It's in the voice of Juan Bernal, and he dictated this account in 1877, so about 40 years after the events that he's talking about. After the Rodeo, Epia Terawenta. Northwest of San Luis Gonzaga, April 1839. San Luis Gonzaga is now underneath a reservoir in central California. We found our horse thieves bathing in the lake at the foot of the pass. Jose Bernal, El Cacalote scouted their camp, slithering like a snake through the tuleres. Some were cooking horse meat, others idle. We circled and surprised them. The swimmers struggled to climb out and arm naked. The rest began their war dance, aiming their bows at us, yelling and grimacing. My brother Bruno rode one down with his rayata, noosed, and dragged him lifeless, easy as rope a calf. I spurred for one who volleyed arrows at me like buns on Christmas Eve. I managed to shoot him in the gut. He toppled face down. Cornelio Hernandez ran by, shouting, "I'll finish him." The Indian jumped up, let fly, and collapsed backward. His shaft pierced Cornelio's neck. He dragged himself to the corpse, pulled a knife, stabbed, broke the blade between the ribs, and with its stub kept excavating toward the heart, at each blow croaking, "I forgive you, brother," with the arrow wobbling under his Adam's apple. This is in the voice of Guillermo Buckle, who was born William Buckle and landed in the Los Angeles area in the early 1820s and came north to the Monterey Bay area around 1829, 1830. In Spanish and then later in Mexican California, if you wanted to own land, you had to become a Catholic. And if you wanted to get married, you had to become a Catholic. And that's how William Buckle became Guillermo Buckle. He married Antonia Cortez, and they eventually had 9 children, 5 of them daughters. It's called Wild Mustard Remembers, and I get the phrase of the title from a poem by Lorna D. Cervantes called Freeway 280. It's in her wonderful first book, Implumata. Wild Mustard Remembers, La Carbonera, Lamas, 1842. When no rain fell for 22 infernal months, to spare the forage before it failed, we tried stampeding droves of horses over ocean cliffs. We penned them in corrals to starve. We slaughtered cattle in numbers surpassing our capacity to flay or cure the hides and rescue a return from the disaster by trade with Yankee smugglers. And still, the herds remaining grazed the native grasses down to the barren root before the feast of their parched carcasses gorged vultures and coyotes. And even so, no rain. It was afterward, once the climate's seasonal storms resumed their cycle, that the alien mustard weed took hold here, spreading further north each year. Already, my younger daughters have never seen this countryside arrayed in March otherwise than in mustard gold. It grows so rank along the valley bottoms. By May, it overtops a person's head on horseback. But as the summer weather settles in, hillsides again put on their oaten coat of old. In the weeks when, well before dawn, a warming air begins to stoke the purgatorial oven of afternoon. Wisest to rest out the heat within a cool retreat, shifting from shade to shade among the oak and aromatic bay, as morning shadows dwindle to a line, a breath, and pause, and change direction, while time hangs aloof, suspended in the balance of the sun. Or from a sheltered cleft, gaze out upon the lion-colored landscape with its indecent contours, the hollows buttocks have, the dimples of a shoulder. At dusk, the deer and cougar disappear, while motionless against its pelt of brittle grasses, when lamps are lighting in the valley's lap, and the emerging stars construct the vault of night. This is in the voice of Forrest Baird, who received his D.Ed from Stanford around 1960. It's called When the Talkies Came to Town. He was my mother's father's brother. When the talkies came to town. Trombone was my first horn. Proficiency came quickly. Soon, I knew all the brass and most wind instruments. In those days, there were 4 ballrooms in San Jose, each with its orchestra and steady business. I got my first gig as a high school sophomore for adult pay, full-time. Playing for people dancing you egg each other on. I was the cat's pajamas. I'd drive back to the ranch past midnight. Before dawn, your grandfather would wake me to hunt quail, or deer or duck. It lasted for 6 years. The month the talkies came to town, the ballrooms closed. Folks stopped dancing and sat down in the dark, in rows, listening, in silence, motionless, as in a dream. A bandmate told me steamship companies hired musicians. I signed on with Matson and sailed on the Malolo, the Pineapple Run, and kept afloat through the Depression, traveling the world with cruise ship orchestras performing show tunes in grand saloons with rolling decks aswash in anxious wealth. The war put a stop to that. Too old for war, ashore, I started teaching music in Marysville and Yuba City schools, and after, enrolled at State for a credential, was asked to stay as an instructor. When it came time to write a dissertation, I proposed to gauge our impact on the students' general education, since our state college charter mandates its promotion. I tested entering freshmen and graduates and found we make no difference. My chairman said, "Forrest, you have no problem. Find another topic." And the last poem in Substrate is called Our Music on the Shore. And I guess it doesn't have a named speaker. It partly derives from a Wiyot Indian myth. The Wiyot Indians still live in the Humboldt Bay area in extreme northern California. Our music on the shore. Today, at sunset of the longest day, we set these driftwood boats afloat downstream. Twigs lashed with twine, toy rafts with painted masts, candles guttering at their bows, decks strewn with flowers. When the waters rose to engulf the world, set adrift with a stone knife in a basket pitched and lidded, a girl and boy survived, alone of all, the story goes, to start again. And so, tonight, amid our boats, we launch a basket also. It holds 2 grass dolls, the whole flotilla, garlanded and decked with ferns and feathers, drifts out into open water till the current catches them and they swing downriver, candles fluttering in the dusk. A few will reach the river mouth by morning, gathered into the oceanic element and dissolved. I will read you 3 more short poems. 2 of them come from a group called Semper Virens, which is, I guess, preoccupied with the culture of the Bay Area that is my home. The first is called The Seamstress. The Seamstress, Dia de los Muertos. That's the Day of the Dead. It's the day after Halloween. And it looks back to an Aztec festival. In fact, the Day of the Dead is celebrated at that time of year over most of the world. The Seamstress, Dia de los Muertos. Knelt in the middle of the kitchen floor at midnight. There's only so much you can do to mend the skeleton spread-eagled on the linoleum, painted in faded day glow on a black leotard. The fabric stretches over time. The fibers strain and give and never spring back all the way. Needle and thread stitch up the raveled sleeve. A sponge blots fresh fluorescence onto spine and rib cage. But light leaks through the brittle weave. The needle's eye grows dimmer, the grasp less sure, and joints ache on the cold floor. Down again on hands and knees to see the kindergartners dance in the bones of the ancestors. Actually, this next poem is not from that group, Sempervirens. It's something more recent, and then the last one, I'll go back to that. It's called Ranch House at Swartz. Swartz is about amounts to a ranch house, and it's way out in the middle of nowhere in southwestern New Mexico. Ranch House at Swartz. Her peach orchard in flagrant bloom at dusk, spilling its apron of petals above the riverbed, flamingo pink darkening to wine as evening eases downstream, a prickle of the mountains on the breeze. The intervening yard from her front porch, a labyrinth of junked machinery, wrecked vehicles stripped, abandoned. This maze of failed devices, like a barricade distractedly erected by her men between her and the solitary blush of color except sage. Was it in derision or from embarrassment? The cool of twilight washes toward the playa. Her best house dress flaps on the line, damp yet. And the last poem I will read is called First Light. First light. Graying chest hair emerging from his apron top in tufts, dusted with a snow of flour above the swelling rondure of his oven belly. Sleeves rolled, arms folded at ease on the porch steps outside the back door of the bakery in the lively air of the early hour, taking a break while the bread cools on racks inside and a breeze picks up off the bay. The mist lifts and the swarming dust of starlight reappears, the constellations that were given names beside the hive-domed ovens of Chaldea and of Ur. Near first light, thick arms cradling rolls and crusty loaves, a gift for late returning revelers, for the derelict who washes in the creek under the bridge his daily bread at daybreak. Thank you.